long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, Constant Reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host. You can find him in over 10 million different ers, but he's only a podcaster in just this one. It's Matt Freeman.
Yeah, that's right, everybody. And all the other ones, I'm a successful novelist and all the other ones. So,
oh, really? I was trying to pump you up here, and now you just insulted yourself.
Well, you know, it's all about character is the thing.
At least you're not William Faulkner.
Yeah.
All right, this week on the show, we are covering the short story written by Stephen King called Oh my gosh, Matt, there's a whole lot to say about this one. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. As I said last week, this was not originally in our season 2 plan to cover the story, but I just threw it in there at the last minute a few months ago and said, screw it, we're going to do it.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I feel like this is going to be more of a light, fun conversation for a light, silly story.
Yeah, I think you're right.
All things, you know, it seems like most of the King, almost all of the King stories that we cover are somewhat heavy in some way or another. This one has like maybe a couple moments of real seriousness, but mostly it's just kind of like, what if evil Kendall?
What if I sold out in the most interesting way possible?
Yeah. You'll pay me how much?
Yeah.
For how many words?
But before we get into we have a couple quick announcements. The first one, since we're just covering a short story this week, obviously next week we're beginning a book, Matt. We're beginning The Talisman, which is the Stephen King, Peter Straub novel. This is a thick book. We're going to be here for a while. I think it's 11 or 12 episodes. So there's still time to run out. If you do not already own a copy of The Talisman, go out and get one and get ready, because it's going to be all Talisman all the time. Actually, I mean, it's going to be all King Straub all the time, because we're covering both of their works back to back, and they're both pretty thick books. So this is going to be basically, Matt, I just get this in your head. This is going to be like the rest of the first half of 2022, and then the entire second half of 2022 will be The Stand.
All right. I'll mark my calendar.
All right. We had another quick announcement, though. Our network just gained a new show, and we wanted to quickly tell y'all about it. The name of the show is The View from Halfway Down. Our friends Alexandra and Sebastian are doing an episode-by-episode analysis and discussion of the Netflix original series BoJack Horseman. This is a show that I quite enjoy. You've never seen BoJack, right, Matt?
Never seen BoJack.
It is a very, very good show. I like it a lot. It's one of those ones, I forget how many seasons it was or how long ago, but it was one of those ones that I think was a statement type show from Netflix that was like, oh wow, they're really doing some interesting things. And it's a show that has plenty to talk about, and our friends are going to be doing that for the next 70 something episodes. So you can find that at doofmedia.com. Just go to podcasts. You can also just type The View from Halfway Down in any podcatcher. They release their first episode, and I think they're going to be doing it weekly. So if you like that show and want to hear people talk about it, I recommend it.
Yeah, sounds good. Go check it out. I won't be, because I didn't,
because you haven't watched the show.
BoJack, but yeah.
I mean, I will say, I don't think their format is quite the Matt Scott format, and one of them has watched/read it and the other hasn't. I think Alexandra is playing the quote unquote Matt role in this show, but she's seen the first 2 seasons, I think. So it's not quite the same thing. So if you're a fresh watcher that has never watched BoJack before, it was like, oh, maybe this will be a great way. There might be some later season spoiler stuff in there. I'm not sure, but it's going to be a fun show no matter what. And BoJack Horseman is definitely a show you should watch regardless. So
cool. Yeah, go check that out.
Yeah. All right, Matt, let's get into it. Let's talk about Stephen King's how do we start? This is obviously, as we mentioned at the top of the show, an interesting little story, right? As Stephen King admits himself in the little blurb that is in The Bazaar of Bad Dreams that starts the short story. This is basically a marketing. It's marketing. The story is a marketing material. 2009 came along, and Amazon was launching their second generation Kindle, and they wanted some popular authors to write some stories that would appear exclusively on the Kindle. And they approached Stephen King, and he says he originally said no, and then he was thinking about it and came up with the story, and then so he changed his mind because he had come up with a good idea, and that story eventually turned into what we see before us.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like King was ambivalent about writing this story, and then it further seems that he hilariously injected 100% of his ambivalence into the story itself. Via the main character, who isn't really too sure about this whole Kindle thing. Sort of grudgingly acknowledges that it has its place, and then, oh no, it's evil.
I mean, well, and the interesting thing is, it's not like we'll talk about this when we get to it, but it's not like the conclusion of the story is, wow, what a device. Technology is clearly moving towards e-readers. Or it's not like a complete rejection of new technology. Books are always better. Like, it's neither of those things at the end, you know, like it's just, that's not what the story ends up actually being about, actually. Yeah.
As you said, it seems to jump the tracks a couple times, actually.
Yeah.
We'll get to all of those details, but it really feels like three different story ideas.
Yeah.
Also, I can't help but wonder if somewhere in Stephen King's house there's a scrap of paper that says "Evil Amazon Kindle?"
Question mark.
I'll
figure that out someday. Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
As we said, the original version of the story was published back in February of 2009 exclusively to the Amazon Kindle, and the version we'll be discussing today, however, was published in the 2015 short story collection, The Bazaar of Bad Dreams. This version of the story is edited. It is a different version, and we will talk about the differences between the two at the very end of the podcast, because I did read them both in preparation for the show. They're not that, it's not that big of a deal. So that's why we're doing it at the end. There's some minor edits, minor changes, but nothing like that changes the story entirely.
Yeah. One of them's from 693472. One of them's from 693473.
Absolutely. So obviously, Matt, this is some story with some light Dark Tower connections, as you realized the first time you picked it up, not knowing that. But I hadn't originally included in season 2. And I think what happened was someone reached out to us and suggested it early on in season 2. They just said, "Hey, what about Ur?" And I was like, "Yeah, what about Ur?" I was like, "Screw it, I'll put it on there. Yeah, it's only 1 week." And then I read the story, Matt, and I remembered why maybe I forgot about Ur, because I honestly don't think I like the story very much at all.
Mm-hmm. I kind of don't mind it. I don't hate it. It's a light, unpolished story without a lot of depth, but I didn't hate reading it. You know, the worst I can really say is rereading it for this episode, I realized that I had completely forgotten that the main character has the two friends. Like I had just like condensed them into one person.
Yeah, because they're not very good characters. That's the thing about this whole story.
Exactly. They're not jumping off the page iconic Stephen King characters. Everything is just, 3 notches lower than what you expect from Stephen King. Basically.
And I like what you said a few minutes ago about King's ambivalence about this. I think you're spot on there. I think, he had an idea for a story, and he's obviously interested in the idea, but I do think like he kind of jokes in the intro in Bizarre Bad Dreams about how this was clearly selling out and how his peers gave him a lot of shit for this. But I do sense a little insecurity here to the fact that he knows he's doing this particular thing, which is like literally just an ad. It's just a story as ad. And I sense it's funny because I feel like there's this push and pull in the story of him being uncomfortable and trying to be like, I don't even really care about this anyway because it's an ad. But also I see like the troll Stephen King in there, like who writes scenes in this as if it is almost a Kindle advertisement sometimes. Like there's just 2 characters discussing the Kindle and then like going almost as if it's like on a like Home Shopping Network or something. And like that has to be intentional too. That's the weird thing about the story. It's so strange. It's so weird that he did this. And I don't know. I think that the most interesting thing about the story to me is that it exists.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, along those lines, it actually feels pretty uneven in that there are parts of it that are like, oh, this is good. This is Stephen King. And then there are parts of it that like you said, it's almost like he, I was going to say took a few shots because to steal himself, but I guess he wouldn't have done that.
No.
but he, he had to like hold his nose and then write something specifically about the Kindle because he was expected to. Anyway,
the last fun fact I'll have before we get into the story itself is I believe Amazon manufactured and gifted him a pink Kindle after he wrote this story, which is delightful.
That is very fun.
All right, so let's get right into it. The first chapter of the story is called Experimenting with New Technology, and we right away meet our protagonist, Wesley Smith. We see here Wesley was an instructor in the English department at Moore College in Moore, Kentucky. Like all instructors in English, he thought he had a novel in himself and would write it someday. Moore College was a sort of institution people called a pretty good school. So, I mean, this is a really interesting start to our story because maybe it's just me, but I don't know if Stephen King likes Wesley Smith very much. Like, I don't think he hates him. I don't think he hates this character. I think if he hated him, the story would probably punish him more than it does. But I wonder if there's a bit of like sliding doors, road less traveled thing going on here with Wesley, like as if this is what King imagines his life might look like had he never sold that first book or perhaps never even written it, because Wesley Smith, he's never going to write that novel. Ever. Like, we know that. He seems like a miserable, kind of bitter little shit at times. And like, we're going to talk about how he treats his girlfriend, but there's this running thread about how he treats all women in this story that's really weird. Yeah.
I mean, the inciting incident of the story, you could say, is predicated on him being a huge fucking jerk.
Yeah.
And, he feels bad about it. I think the fundamental thing about Wesley is that he's a coward.
Mm-hmm.
And he knows he's a coward. Like the reason why, and this isn't me, just being mean. Like, I'm pretty sure this is strongly textual. Is the idea that he's meek. He doesn't stick his neck out. This is why he has a notebook with a few scratched out book titles, but no real work on a novel, because he's too afraid to commit to these things or to really try at anything. He's just the kind of person who floats through life without taking any risks.
Yeah.
And then, the culmination of the story is he ends up having to actually take some action, but it doesn't actually feel dramatically earned or connected. I mean, I'm jumping way ahead, but it's not like fundamentally though, that's what the arc was supposed to be. Obviously.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's really interesting though, because we'll get into that inciting incident where he calls his girlfriend an illiterate bitch. And then like he says when he says it, like, I'd never used that kind of language about a woman ever before. And then he proceeds for the next 40 pages to call every woman he interacts with a bitch in some way, like not to their face, but like in his head, like the best friend of Ellen who tells him that they don't work, he calls her a bitch. The drunk who kills all those kids, he called like, and like he's like, I've never treated women this way. And then, but he does it for the rest of the book. It's just wild to me.
Yeah, definitely. I agree that I don't think Stephen King wants us to like this character, although maybe he wants us to kind of forgive him or understand him or something.
Yeah, I don't even know, because I don't know if there's too much to understand. Like there's, I don't know. I don't want to spend this whole episode shitting on this story because, like you said, like I didn't hate the story. I think it's a fun, light read, but it is missing a lot of what the usual Kingness is, and I think it's because it's a marketing ploy.
Yeah, it's missing the stuff that we like to talk about most, which is the characterization and the storytelling but it does have some fun in games, and we're about to get to that.
Like let's just be clear here. The concept of the story is, as you've pointed out again and again about Stephen King, great. It's a great kernel of an idea of a story for sure.
Yeah.
But the first emotion that the story connects us with is spite. Wesley Smith is a man that is spiteful. We learn that he has bought the new Kindle, what his colleagues call a gadget and he calls a toy, but he didn't get it because he wanted it. He didn't get it because he wanted to read on it. He got it out of spite to prove something to his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend, Ellen Silverman. To be fair to him, we've been mean to Wesley so far, but to be fair to Wesley, I've definitely bought some shit out of spite after my girlfriend and I broke up. But I mean, come on, it wasn't a Kindle. That would be ridiculous. I got a dog. I bought a dog.
I love spite dogs.
Yeah. Well, see, she and I like wanted to get a dog, and she wanted her type of dog, and I wanted my type of dog, and we had basically compromised, and by that I mean we were going to end up getting her type of dog. And so the first thing I did after we broke up is I bought my fucking dog. Yeah, I can get my dog now.
That's I think Wesley would say that's not spiteful enough to poison a kitten or however it was, because once you get a dog, it's like, well, I can't feel any negative emotions about this at all anymore because there's a dog now. That's
true. I love my dog. She's looking at me right now. She thinks she knows I'm talking about her.
You know what's funny is I've never met that dog.
Oh yeah, that's true. God, we don't see each other enough.
We don't see each other.
She's 11 years old now.
I know.
All right, Matt. So we learned that Wesley works at an average school in an average town and has a very average life. I actually like this writing here a lot. The school's only marks of exceptionalism had to do with its Division III football team and its Division III women's basketball team. The football team, the Moore Meerkats, was one of the worst in America, having won only 7 games in the last 10 years. There was a constant talk of disbanding it. The current coach was a drug addict who liked to tell people that he had seen The Wrestler 12 times and never failed to cry when Mickey Rourke told his estranged daughter that he was just a broken down piece of meat. The women's basketball team, however, was exceptional in a good way, especially considering that most of the players were no more than 5'7" and were preparing for jobs as marketing managers, wholesale buyers, or, if they were lucky, personal assistants to men of power. So that's a lot of good writing. I like that a lot. And I like this idea that Wesley is the football team and then Ellen is obviously connected to the basketball team because she's the coach. So I just love this dichotomy. Wesley sucks. Ellen's actually really cool.
Yeah, that's one of the ideas that permeates especially the first part of the story is the idea of mediocrity. And Wesley obviously having this complex about mediocrity and how he feels like a mediocrity and how it sort of makes sense to him that he would end up at this mediocre school. And the two, him and his friend talking about mediocrity and all of this. So kind of everybody in the story is a mediocrity except for his girlfriend who is not really in the story.
not at all. Yeah. I don't know. I guess Robbie, like there's hope for Robbie, right? Like
there's hope for Robbie, but he is specifically on the football team.
Yes, the really terrible football team. That's true.
Yeah.
I also like this part here where we're introduced to the Kindle itself. The Kindle was currently sitting on American Dreams, the textbook Wesley used in his intro to American Lit class. How's that little bastard working out for you? Fine, Wesley said. Will it ever replace the book? Never, Wesley said, but he had begun to wonder. I like the idea of the Kindle sitting on top of a book titled American Dreams. It's just like, this is the culmination of American Dreams is we've eliminated the book and just got this cool tablet. For the record here, I own a Kindle. I like it. I like reading books too. I also like to collect books. So like if it's a book I know I'm going to like, I will buy the book. Like if it's a book for our book club, I will usually get it on Kindle so it doesn't crowd my books shelf space any more than it already is. I like Kindles.
I mean, I used to be big into e-readers. My evolution actually went, paper books to e-readers, and then once I got onto audiobooks, I've never looked back. But
yeah, and that's interesting, right? Like this book was written in 2009, right? It's been 12 years since the story was written, and it is true that Kindles and other e-readers are like more popular than ever, right? But it also is true that it hasn't replaced the book yet. The books still exist. There are still bookstores. There are much less bookstores than there were 15 years ago, but there are still bookstores. But I don't think anyone in 2022 is asking the question, are e-readers going to replace books? Because I think the thing most likely to replace a book is the audiobook, right? Like this is a phenomenon that I don't think anyone in 2009 probably saw coming, like the explosion in popularity of the audiobook space.
Yeah, I think that what was missing from the picture was, the ubiquity of the, even more. There were smartphones in 2009, but now they're even more ubiquitous, even more powerful, even better. Now it seems like you walk around and no, you don't see anybody with wired headphones. You see everybody has wireless headphones, which just makes everything just a little bit more convenient. So overall, it's just the level of convenience has increased for audiobooks specifically.
Yeah,
it's funny that though. I mean, so I earlier I might have kind of implied that I thought that Wesley was kind of channeling some of King's ambivalence, but I actually don't think that Wesley is supposed to be like a stand-in for King's opinions here, because King is he famously likes audiobooks.
Yeah.
Even back when they were on actual tapes, he likes audiobooks. And I don't really believe that he would be a snob about, oh, I only read paperback books, the way Wesley is described as being. I don't think that's just like King's opinion that he's saying here.
No, I think I'm guessing here, but I agree with you. I think to King, the most important thing is the story, not the medium it comes in. If it's a good story, he'll read it. And for a man that reads as much as he does, I have to assume he reads some things on e-readers, or else his house would be filled up. So
yeah, right. I mean, certain things like Wesley thinking to himself, "Oh my God, the books are so much cheaper. This thing's going to pay for itself." Like that does seem like it might have been an authentic Stephen King thought.
Yeah, and also a great advertisement for the Amazon Kindle.
Yeah, right.
That's what, like, when he orders the thing, he's like, "Oh, and I expected this thing to be $500, but it's way cheaper than that." Looks at camera.
Yeah, doesn't actually say the price.
Yeah,
that's great. Yeah, I was just wondering, like, how often do you do, e-reader versus paper book these days?
Yeah, these days, I've been on a kick lately that I've just been doing books, and I think it's because I've been reading so much Stephen King, and I own every single one of those books. I don't want to read those on Kindle. But like I said, if it's something that I'm like experimenting on, I'm not sure if I'm going to like it. I don't want to take up space on my shelf with it. So I'll get my Kindle out and buy it on there. I mean, like, look, when you're traveling, it's so convenient. Like, I remember we went to Hawaii a couple of years ago, and I was reading it, and I had 2 to 3 other books I wanted to bring, and it's just fucking ridiculous, like, it's just so much space versus this little tiny thin. I mean, they're even smaller and thinner than they were when this story was written. They're so convenient. Yeah.
Well, the funny thing is I don't have a Kindle, but like I got the Kindle app on my phone, and so it's like, what's the difference at that point? I
don't love reading on my phone screen. I like the Kindle, like, faux paper, look at, like, not too hard on the eyes screen type. I like that. I'm not in love with reading for a very extended period of time on my phone screen, despite the fact that I do it constantly all the time, literally every minute of every day.
No, I've heard people say that before, so I don't know, maybe I'll think about getting one.
So the ad is working on you.
Yeah, the ad's slowly working on me. This podcast itself is a stealth ad for Kindles.
So, Matt, we get to learn the history between Wesley and his ex, Ellen, and why she dumped his ass. And again, like we said, we don't paint Wesley in a really great light here. Ellen comes home from a rough day at work and needs to vent to her boyfriend, who is in the middle of reading a book. She, in her frustration, takes the book from him and throws it across the room. And his response is, "That was a first edition I got from my father, you illiterate bitch." Yikes. Now, look, Matt, I, like many readers, am kind of crazy about my books. When I read, I try very carefully not to damage the book at all. I don't like opening it too much to break the binding. I don't like highlighting in my books or marking in my books. In fact, for this whole project, I bought entirely new sets of all the Dark Tower books just so I could highlight in them and not feel bad about it, which is ridiculous, but I did it. I'm really particular about who I lend my books to, just to make sure they're treated well. I'm very, very particular with my books, but, like, come on. I mean, it's Deliverance, right? That's the name of the book he's reading. It's Deliverance, and I understand it's a first edition, and I'm not saying Deliverance is a bad book. I've never read it. I have seen the movie with Jon Voight and Burt Reynolds in it, though. It's a pretty good movie. And I understand it's one of the great American novels. Like on a list of like 100 great American novels, it's probably on there, right? But
I guess.
Come on. It's not like a Dickens first edition here, Wesley. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a I think that the thing to me about what's hurtful about this insult, it's not that he calls her a bitch.
Yeah.
It's that he says she's an illiterate bitch. Yeah. And then later in his own thoughts thinks, well, she was basically illiterate. She only reads like self-help books and books about volleyball and she doesn't read literature. And it's like, holy shit, Wesley, you're such a prick. It's like that. Like, if I were in her position, it would it would like that's the part that would hurt me about the interaction would be, okay, first of all, someone yelled at me in a rude way, which is just hurtful in and of itself, but also like, oh, you're now revealing to me that you think of me as dumb.
Yeah. And I wonder, like, we don't get to see a lot from Ellen in this book at all, but I do wonder if there's like, he was tapping into some insecurity that she felt, right? Like, she's a basketball coach, a very successful one, but she's a basketball coach, and she's dating a English professor who is obsessed with reading, reads all the time. I wonder if she feels a little insecure about that she feels dumb sometimes. And for him to say that is activating her insecurity in a very specific kind of way.
Yeah. It is interesting to consider, like, what does she see in him? Because from his perspective, he thinks of himself as a loser, as a mediocrity. He doesn't understand why she's with him. He comments to the effect that, like, after sex, he's like, oh, you're just so much better than me, and I could never. And she's like, shut up.
What a fucking turn on, right?
Yeah,
it's like, oh, that sex was great, but it's not because of me, because I suck. Oh, right. I'm so hot right now for your shitty self burn.
Yeah, your self deprecation is just so arousing. Yeah. But she sees something in him though. Like, and I think it's what you say, that she sees him as an intellectual, and is probably, it's probably appealing that he has this house full of books. That's probably like sort of charming in its own way.
Yeah.
He just needs to get over his bullshit.
Let's be clear. Like, Wesley would absolutely be one of those people that in 2022 would say that audiobooks don't count as reading. Like, 100%.
Totally. Yeah.
And of course, the reason he gets the Kindle, though, is because in her rage, Ellen says, why can't you read off the computer just like the rest of us? Again, this is not the source of her actual anger at him. The reason she was mad at him is because she was trying to have a conversation with him, and he's just sitting there reading a book, which, look, again, this is something, as much as I dislike Wesley, I can relate to, because I read a lot. Like, I have books in front of me, and sometimes my wife will walk into the room and just start talking to me, and I'm just like, I have a book in my hand. But to be fair to my wife, I am the type of person that, like, always needs to be doing something. So, like, I'm either watching a movie, watching a TV show, reading a book, or listening to a podcast, basically any spare second I have. So if she didn't just walk in and start talking, then she'd never be able to talk. So I get it. But yeah, he was being a jerk. Like, and yes, picking up someone's book and throwing it across the room is not the most mature reaction to that, but he sucks. He really does suck.
Yeah. He sucks. You're right. But he's gonna redeem himself.
Is he though?
It's gonna be fine. Yeah. I mean, no.
The redemptive beating the shit out of a woman.
Gonna go beat a poor woman who's in a really bad spot in her life.
So I love that Wesley, like, first sees the Kindle in his class. Like, we learn here that the reason the Kindle was bought on kind of an impulse, because he's in his class teaching, and one of our other main characters, Robbie Henderson, is reading their assignment off a Kindle, and he gets mad at him for it. But then Robbie kind of shows him how it works. And as we talked about already, this is kind of like one big Kindle advertisement here. Like, Robbie Henderson here almost serves as like the Kindle spokesperson, like showing our narrator what all he can do with it and how cool it is, right? But again, my complaint here is this is not a story about how a stuffy old English teacher learns to embrace technology and sees the value of a book in a different way. That's not what this is about, actually, at all. Like that, like all this laying the groundwork of his resistance to technology, and it doesn't matter to the conclusion of the story.
Yeah. It's honestly, it's just this. I don't know, man.
What do you think? I mean, what do you think Amazon's reaction was to this thing, though, when King turns in the story and he made their thing they're trying to sell evil?
Yeah, but I don't know why you'd hire Stephen King for an ad and then not expect him to make the product evil.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's just, it reminds me of when Stephen King shows up on The Simpsons. And Marge asks him what he's writing, and he says he's taking a break from horror to write a biography of Ben Franklin. And then he just like starts rambling, and the description ends with, and the key he tied to the kite, it opened the gates of hell. So that's
great.
That's what you get with King. So.
Yeah. What the weird thing is, though, that like we've been joking about how the Kindle is evil. It's not actually. It's like it's just a machine, just like it's there's nothing I mean, I guess there technically is supernatural stuff here because we have other worlds and low men and stuff, but like the Kindle is just a machine. It's doing what it's supposed to do. It's not broken. It's not haunted. It's just a machine. Right. And it's just a machine from another universe where those machines have other functions.
I mean, indeed, it actually does, help him save his several people from dying. So it's not evil. It's just cursed. It's a supernatural Kindle. Yeah, you're right though that technically it's not evil. So we're being a little bit unfair.
Yeah. Speaking of the Kindle, we move on to chapter 2, which is called Functions. And this chapter starts with giving Wesley a bit of hope in the future of his relationship. Ellen calls him and says she's ready to talk to him again and she wants to try again. She heard he was walking around with a Kindle, and that was a sign, which is just hilariously ironic, right? Like that. I mean, there's a lot of wish fulfillment in this to me, because I think when you do something out of spite after a breakup, the goal is that the person you were doing it to notices and it affects them in the exact way you wanted them to, and they contact you to tell you that it affected them in the exact way you wanted them to.
Yeah.
Like this is like,
that's the fantasy.
It's the fantasy, and he's getting it here. Like I read this part and I was like, oh, if only I could have gotten that with every one of my relationships that I did something stupid out of spite. If only that AOL Instant Messenger away message I put that was obviously about her got her to contact me.
Yeah. This is the most fantastical part of the whole thing. Well, so actually, I mean, the way that I kind of interpreted this was like Ellen is looking for any excuse to forgive him. She probably didn't even need to hear that he had the Kindle. That was almost just like her, like, oh, I have a piece of information. I can use this as the excuse for why I'm calling you. Yeah. But it's not like, I don't know. We don't know this Ellen character except through him, but it kind of seems like she is probably like insecure, like you said earlier, and doesn't think she can do any better than him and wants to get him back because she regrets leaving.
Yeah. I mean, again, like I don't like Wesley, and I am letting this influence my opinion of his actions in this book. But the one thing we do see is like they had this fight. He said something nasty. She stormed out, and he's like, and I haven't talked to her since. And his friend is like, did you try to call her? And he's like, oh yeah, I tried to call a bunch of times. And half of me is like, how hard did you really try though, Wesley? Like how, like, what like we don't get to see like what those calls sounded like, what those messages sounded like, like what his apology actually sounded like. Did he make an apology? Like we don't get to hear any of that actually. And part of me wants to be like, you didn't try very hard, did you? And so this is Ellen finally reaching out and being like, hey, I've been waiting for you to just apologize. Yeah. So here's because you are so, as you said, cowardly and with a complete lack of action. Here's me, Ellen, taking the initiative here and doing something.
I agree. I think he just took he was just like, oh, okay, I guess we're broken up.
I guess we're broken up now.
I don't think he tried. Yeah. So there was a line in around this point of the story where it talks about him using books as a kind of solace or kind of escape. Sure. And he specifically mentions his old friends, the main characters of the Master and Commander book series, The Voyages of Jack Aubrey, that was the Russell Crowe film, and the Doctor on that ship, played by Paul Bettany in the Master and Commander film, is named Stephen Maturin. So I've never heard the name Maturin anywhere else except for the turtle and for the Dr. Paul Bettany character. What do you make of this, Scott? Dark Tower connection.
Look, yeah, it's
I mean, that's where he got the name, right? I mean, right?
I have no idea. No, I have no idea where he got the name from.
Well, then, but why else would the name Maturin show up in this Dark Tower adjacent novel unless he was being cute, right?
I guess so. Like, so wait, so are you, what is the chicken and the egg here? Are you saying that he named the turtle after the character on the Master and Commander book series?
Maybe. I mean, what else would it be named after is my honest question. I don't like maybe he really loved the Master and Commander books and thought that was a great character.
Sure. I love it. I love it. I don't know. It's very possible that Maturin is a reference to something older. I have no idea.
Yeah. Anyway, if anybody else knows of a different thing that Maturin is probably referring to, and I'm being an idiot, let me know. But this is the first time that I've seen King make any sort of like reference to like the idea of any other Maturin.
That was a deep pull, man. I mean, that was like three deep in.
Well, no, I didn't put it together though. Like he has the name Maturin occurs.
Oh, is it in the
Yeah.
story? Oh, I missed that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, now, yes, 100%. Well, I mean, he definitely picked this book to reference in here to be a wink to Maturin the turtle. Which is the chicken and the egg in this situation? No idea.
Sure. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yes. Good.
I forgot that name actually. I thought you were just saying that like he referenced a book series, and I happened to know that one of the characters in the book series is named Maturin, and therefore this must be a specific reference. If he name dropped.
He didn't name drop. I just chose to say it in an extremely elliptic way.
Gotcha.
But he mentioned, well, that's what was funny, and that's what made me look it up. Is he mentions the names Stephen Maturin and Jack Aubrey, or maybe he just said Aubrey and Maturin, and I was like, what is that? And then I was like, oh, Master and Commander, and then I was like, oh, that Maturin is for and yeah. Anyway, yeah. I
mean, it fits, right? Because the thing we know about the other Guardians is they're all references to stories, so
that
certainly fits.
That's a good point. That I didn't put that together. It does make sense that they would all be literary figures, Shardik and.
God, what's the damn it?
I don't remember. That's the only one I remember right now. But yeah, no, they probably all are actually. They almost certainly all are. Yeah,
I'm really mad about this because we learned another one and went through the keyhole and I can't think of it now. Well, our listeners will remind us, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So the Kindle in question we learn is a bit different. For one, it's pink. It also has this really interesting menu called functions.
Yeah, I have to mention that back when I read this story originally and I got to this part where the Kindle is pink, this was like right when we were talking about all the pink imagery in Wizard and Glass, and I lost my shit. And then of course it only gets more explicit from here.
It's so funny. I like when you went on your pink thing, all I could think about was this fucking pink Kindle, and like I didn't like you would like your whole experimentation with was like completely independent. You didn't tell me you were doing this. I don't think you told me you read it until like months later, where you were like, oh yeah, I read this, and yeah. So I had no idea that was going on, and so you're sitting here going down your pink rabbit hole, and I'm just like, oh my god, one day he's gonna read this story and he's gonna lose his fucking mind. So I'm glad that was happening simultaneously. That's really fun.
It's pretty funny.
So the functions in the functions are called books, news archive, and local under construction. We'll deal with each of these individually, but first we have to get to books, and this is where the actual true conceit of the story begins, because we learn that this Kindle allows Wesley to search the Kindle catalog from over 10 million other worlds, aka other levels of the tower. We see Wesley search for Hemingway and finds that on 719 1974, there's a lot of 19s in there, of course, Hemingway lived longer and wrote books he never actually wrote in our world, including one called Corlin's Dogs. So let's just talk about this concept now, Matt. Here we go. Yeah. What do you think of this? Because I think this is really, really cool.
Yeah, this is a really fun concept. I think it's genuinely one of those great King premises where, if you happen to put the book down right after you get to this reveal, then you're going to be thinking about it for the next 24 hours. Oh man, what would I do if I had this device and it showed me totally unknown literary masterpieces? How would that go? And then, he proceeds to explore that in a fun way.
Yeah, that's it. In the next chapter titled Wesley Refuses to Go Mad, that is exactly what he does. He starts really just diving down the rabbit hole, searching everyone. He searches Edgar Allan Poe and finds in some worlds Poe wrote 6 novels. He finds a bunch more Hemingway. One really interesting fact here, Matt, though, is he tried Faulkner. Faulkner was not there at all. in any of the Earths.
Mm-hmm.
I love this little detail, right? That ours is the only reality in existence who is blessed with the existence of William Faulkner, the author.
Yeah, isn't Faulkner's the one who wrote about Darkling and Tinct, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. So that's just more Dark Tower. Anyway, yeah.
Faulkner is fascinating to me because I think he's the one author that I think high school English did the most damage for me on, because it made me dislike him a lot. Like reading The Sound and the Fury in high school made me not like Faulkner. But I like every time I've revisited him since then, I'm like, oh, actually, he's brilliant. And these books are masterpieces. And it's just that the way it was being shoved down my throat really turned me against it.
Yeah, I never actually read Faulkner. Ever.
Oh, you got to, man. It's so good. So good.
As
I Lay Dying is great. Sound and the Fury is really good. It's just hard to read because he's doing the stream of consciousness stuff, and it makes it difficult to read at times. And that's it, you just gotta appreciate it. And like just having a teacher say, "This is good, read it," is not the way to do it.
Yeah, right. I agree.
But I mean, what do you think? Like, why that detail, right? Like, what is it about Faulkner? Is it just because of the Darkle and Tinct? Is it because of the Dark Tower stuff? Is it because he just really loves William Faulkner and wanted to make him really important?
Yeah, I think it's a way of saying that William Faulkner is this very important human. He's this very unique soul, maybe, or we're very lucky to have William Faulkner, and
sure,
you're not guaranteed to have a William Faulkner in the same way that maybe Hemingway can be considered to be like a fixture of the planet Earth in a way that Faulkner is not. It also kind of prompted me to kind of nerdily ask myself, like, are we in Keystone Earth in this novel? I would assume we're in whatever Earth we're in because we have a Faulkner.
Yeah.
That would have been kind of funny if he was like, no Jacob Bobblesnobble. And you're like, what? And then that's the reveal that he's not on our Earth, but whatever. No, it's Faulkner, which means he's on our Earth.
Yeah, I mean, our Earth is Keystone Earth, so process of elimination says if he's telling us that there's only one reality in existence that has Faulkner, then it's got to be ours. So,
which isn't maybe that's why it was like a big deal that he changes the timeline, because if he's changing the timeline on Keystone Earth, that could be considered to be bad.
That could be. Could be. So I have to ask the question here, Matt. Who would you read? Like you have this Kindle. Who's the first guy or girl you track down and see what else they've written?
You're gonna laugh at me, but I would find the real versions of The End of the Wheel of Time, written by the original author, and I would find the rest of the Song of Ice and Fire books. And then after that, maybe I would look. I haven't even read all of Shakespeare's works that exist,
right? So
it would be a bit ridiculous of me to claim something like, oh, I'm going to go find all of the missing Shakespeares. It's like that wouldn't edify me personally in the way that it would it would edify these characters.
No, I think you're right. I think that's the move here, because Stephen King's my favorite author. Would I look Stephen King up and see what other books he wrote in other realities? Probably. But would I make it my priority to read those first? No, because Stephen King's already written a lot of books, right? And yes, I've read practically all of them. I think I've got 2 more I haven't read yet that I'm getting to here at the end of my journey with the reread. But I've gotten to experience a lot of Stephen King. We have been blessed with so much of Stephen King's words. I would look to these authors that I didn't get to read. You're absolutely right. Song of Ice and Fire, the Kingkiller Chronicles.
Yeah.
How many Urs out there to Patrick Rothfuss write the 3rd book? These are those are the things I'd want to see, where an author abandoned a project or died, or only wrote 1 or 2 books and then never wrote anything again. Authors that we've only gotten 1 or 2 things from would be the ones I'd be most interested in really diving into first.
Yeah. And part of me would also be curious to look at an alternate dimension version of a book that I actually knew really well.
Sure.
and just not even necessarily to read it in depth, but maybe just look through it and see like what other ways could this have been?
Yeah. No, I think that's fun. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the cool thing about this idea is there's like unlimited things you could do with it. I think the problem with it, though, as fun as this conceit is, what's the story? You know, like I think it's really interesting that this thing kind of starts to drive Wesley a little bit insane. And of course it would. Like you and I have just been thinking about the implications of this, and it's like overwhelming the sheer access and the meaning of what this means. Like it, proves the multiverse, and also you've got access to incredible art. But like what's the story?
Right. Well, he abandons it because he abandons this function of the Kindle and then switches over to using the time travel part, which is a totally different. It might as well be a totally different artifact at that point.
Yeah.
We're not using the parallel dimension book reading thing. Like
exactly.
I either think he didn't know. I'm not trying to be mean, but either Stephen King didn't know how to turn this into a story, or it was in his mind. It was like this is too big and too complex of a thing to really explore fully. Like one of the stories might have been, for example, what Robbie says, which is this guy's a mediocrity. He desperately wants approval. He wants to win his girlfriend back. Well, then obviously he should copy Hemingway's masterpiece and pass it off as his own. That's obviously what you should do. Like
that, that is so self-evidently the thing to do that like when the story just says, no, I'm not going to do that, I'd feel cheap. I'm just like, what? Like we're jumping ahead now, but I mean, that's the story, right? Like that's the story is like, I mean, that's so the story that it's been done before, right? That like there was that movie that came out a couple of years ago, Yesterday, where this guy, is in a car accident or something, wakes up and finds out that nobody else remembers the Beatles except for him. And so what does he do? He just like makes all the Beatles songs and gets rich off of them. And that's the story. Like that's what you could do with this. And I think you're right that the problem with that story is that's a novel. Like you go down that road and suddenly you're telling a much bigger, longer, more involved story than this one-off marketing thing that you're churning out because Amazon was going to throw you a few mil or something,
Yeah, exactly. And I think he knew he had to get it truncated down and just came up with something about time travel.
Time travel, like just a boring ho-hum time travel plot.
Yeah, we literally just truncate the whole premise, or what appears to be the premise. It's just like, oh yeah, we're done with that now. Yep.
We jumped way ahead, but it felt like a perfect time to launch into those complaints. One more thing I want to highlight here is again Wesley's just patheticness. He had checked his own name and discovered what he feared. Although the Urs were lousy with Wesley Smiths, one appeared to be a writer of westerns, another an author of porno novels such as Pittsburgh Panty Party. None of them seemed to be him. Of course, it was hard to be 100% sure, but it appeared that he had stumbled on 10.4 million alternate realities, and he was an unpublished loser in all of them.
And yet every Peter Parker becomes Spider-Man.
I mean, let's say a couple things here. There's no way he checked 10.4 million Kindles to see if he was an author, right? Like he just probably went around for about an hour checking random ones and didn't find it. And because he's Wesley Smith, he decided that meant that my sample size must be sufficient to show that I am a loser in every single world. The end.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you're right there. I actually just took it on face value, honestly. And I was thinking about like, what's the philosophical implication here? Because it's basically saying that across countless worlds and events, various versions of this man exist, and they're all basically him, regardless of what life experiences shaped him.
Sure.
And there's practically no set of circumstances that was capable of getting this particular guy to write a good book or a book that got published.
Maybe I'm speaking out of turn here. Is it? I forget exactly how the function of the Kindle works. You search. Oh, that's right. You just search for author name first. So like, and then it tells you all the Urs that author appears in. So he wouldn't have to individually go to each of the 10.4 million Urs. He would just search his name, and he would see the few Urs that other Wesley Smiths popped up in that weren't him.
And then he would check.
Yeah,
I
so I was wrong there. So
yeah, I think that's right. And you know, I mean, what's funny is he could totally be one of the porn writers and just want to believe that that's a different person.
Yeah, or the Western writers. Maybe he really got into Westerns in a different version of reality. Yeah, you don't know.
Yeah, sure, right, exactly. I mean, that's the funny thing is, okay, so then you take the flip side of it, and it seems like Hemingway writes books in almost every reality where he exists, even if the reality is so different that he writes hard-boiled detective novels instead of which I actually think that you're on. It's highly subtextual, but it's possible that, hey, maybe he is the guy who writes the Westerns. If Hemingway can write detective novels, then but like he doesn't want to accept that. Like you get the sense that he's this pretentious guy who wants to write a novel, you know.
Yeah. I do love the detail about Hemingway writing hard-boiled detective novels, but also still taking a break to write what was it again?
I forgot.
A Call to Arms.
A Farewell to Arms.
A Farewell to Arms. There we go. Yeah, I don't know why I can't remember the name of Hemingway books all of a sudden. But yeah, like in every reality, he still writes A Farewell to Arms. Like there's something key and core about that book that is so ingrained in him that he's going to write that one still no matter what. I think, see, this is like, that's a fascinating concept, and I want that to be the concept that the story explores, and it just doesn't. It just doesn't.
It's kind of funny because Wesley thinks he has a novel in him, but evidently doesn't. Whereas Hemingway has one novel that's literally in him, no matter what happens. Almost spiritually.
Yeah, definitely. So I like this part right here where he's kind of, as he's going mad, talking to himself. I refuse to spend the rest of my day looking at that thing, he said, and I refuse to go mad. I refuse to look, and I refuse to go mad. To look or go mad, I refuse both. But the pink Kindle was in his hand. He had taken it out even as he had been denying its power over him. When had he done that? And did he really intend to sit here in this empty classroom mooning over it? So like the thing is not magic, right? But it has this allure over it for sure.
Yeah, I mean it's basically a smartphone. You know?
Yeah. I mean that is how I'm not going to check Twitter today. I'm not going to check what the fuck. I'm literally
I'm actively scrolling Twitter.
How did that happen? Yeah. And this is like, again, to repeat what you said already, this is so cool. I mean, like this idea is cool. The way it is sucking Wesley into it is cool. Like he brings in his coworker, Don Allman, and he brings in Robbie, his student, the two characters that you really can't remember because there's really nothing about them at all. And they're like, both of them are big, lib heads. Is that a term? And so they're obsessed with it as well. And it's like, it's so interesting and fascinating, and you're totally with them. Like when Don discovers that Shakespeare wrote more plays. I have read just about every single thing Shakespeare has written, Matt, and like the idea that I could read a new Shakespeare play that nobody else has read, that's fucking I want it. I want this Kindle. I want this Kindle right now.
Yeah.
And I take back what I said about making the Kindle evil and Amazon being mad at him, because this is the best Kindle ad ever, because I would buy 50 of these just in case maybe one of them ends up being a pink one,
Yeah.
But then the story just says, okay, we're done with this really cool idea part. We're moving on.
Yeah.
The end.
Yeah. Now we're going to almost sort of into the idea that this isn't even a device for reading books. This is some kind of like navigation tool for dimension hopping time travelers or something. like
sure.
What like I don't know. It is kind of fun to imagine like who built this, why does this exist, who is this supposed to be for? And of course no answers are supplied because you don't really want them, but it's just fun to think about.
Yeah. So when the three are kind of discussing how the heck Wesley got his magic Kindle, they discover that his credit card has never been charged, not for the device itself, nor for any of the books he's purchased, functions or otherwise. The reason, the three kind of reason that what happened there is that Wesley transposed some of the numbers on his credit card, which means that he ordered the Kindle from an where those are the right numbers, and the Kindles have this functionality in them, which means that Amazon is indeed a multi-dimensional entity which explains their ability to get my packages to me so fast.
Yeah.
Because they exist in all dimensions.
Yeah, and they have doorways.
Yeah.
And I'm being absolutely serious. This means that King is saying that Amazon is probably a branch of North Central Positronics or Sombra or whatever. It's the only in-universe explanation for why this would happen.
You're right. You're absolutely right. You are absolutely right. All right. Moving on to Chapter 4, News Archive. I guess we should say, Matt, here at the beginning, like, he saw a picture of the Dark Tower when he booted up the functions. I didn't put that in the script, and I just realized we should at least mention that the tower is on the Kindle right away.
Yeah. This is clearly which actually maybe lends a bit of credence to what he says toward the end, where he says, well, maybe the tower wanted me to do this. Sure. Yeah.
All right. So Chapter 4, News Archive. And before we move on to this chapter, I do want to stop because we haven't talked about Don and Robbie very much at all. What do you think of them, Matt? I mean, we've kind of already talked about that we're not really huge fans of them. I think out of the two of them, Don is definitely the worst. Like I could not pick a character trait of Don other than like
he has kids.
He has kids, and he's kind of like he kind of tries to be quippy, but it's not very good.
Yeah, he doesn't. It's a rare example of King making the mistake of telling you information about the character, but not really characterizing. You know, the difference between those two things is the difference between, normal writers and great writers. And, like you said, he's more likely to have a clever one-liner than any of the other characters, but they also have clever one-liners at times. And so it's not really enough to make him stand out.
Sure.
Sure. And then Robbie is more, there's more of a relationship there. You could maybe call it an arc. Not really, though. It's pretty thin. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I think he's definitely the more interesting. I like this section here at the beginning of this chapter where he's talking to he's at Wesley's apartment and he's talking about reading and stuff. And he says, my parents have never been, great readers, a few magazines, some diet books, a self-help manual or two. That's it. I might have been the same way if not for you. Just banging my brains out on the football field, with nothing else except maybe teaching PE in Giles County. That's in Tennessee. Yeehaw. Wesley was touched by this, probably because he had been hurled through so many emotional hoops lately. Thanks, but remember, there's nothing wrong with a good loud yeehaw. That's part of who you are too. Both parts are equally valid. So, I mean, it's interesting that Robbie is kind of like living in kind of in between two worlds here with like the football side of him, the Southern side of him, and the intellectual side of him. And we have Wesley who's says, but I think this is an attempt at showing that Wesley is changing here, like, because I just don't believe the same guy who called his girlfriend an illiterate bitch is going to be like, there's nothing wrong with, good old fashioned Tennessee yeehaw. And like, like, I think it's him trying to show that he's changing, but I don't know. Like, I don't buy the change. I don't see the reason for the change quite yet.
Yeah. He's just under a lot of stress. That's not the same thing as having a meaningful and motivated character change. The part of this that I like is, you get the sense that he doesn't actually have a lot of real connection with his students. Like it seems like he enjoys his job just fine. He doesn't seem to be complaining about it, but he doesn't nor does he seem like this is his passion. And so Robbie admitting that, hey, like you make a difference to me, teach. Yeah. Really does touch him. And that's good.
I think you're right there, because one of the defining characteristics of Robbie before we actually meet him is that Wesley cannot remember his name at all. He calls him like two different names. He knows it starts with an R, but he cannot remember his name. And I do think that's a good way of King saying he's not very active. He's not very involved with these kids that he's teaching. He's just doing it. Like, you get the idea that Wesley probably took this job because he's like, oh, I'll teach people how to write, and while I'm working on my novel at the side. And then fast forward 10 years later, novel's not done. Suddenly being a teacher at this school is your career, and you never really wanted it to be that. But yeah, like seeing the way he can have an impact on people awaken something in him for sure.
Yeah. I mean, maybe this is what galvanizes him to be the one Wesley who publishes a book.
Maybe we'll never know, because the book is not about that at all.
I just made a connection, which I don't know if there's anything to this, but King famously, threw away the first draft of the first novel that then became his breakout.
Mm-hmm.
It was Tabitha who took it out of the trash and said, hey, don't do that. You gotta publish this. And, so he had a woman in his life who was pushing him to be more than what he maybe would have been if he were left to his own devices.
Yeah.
And here we have a character who is wallowing, and there's a woman in his life who gives him a notebook and says, for your novel ideas, and she's the one who's going to push him. So maybe much depends upon, in other words, maybe they end up together, and then she pushes him to write, and then he becomes the writer, and he actualizes.
I love this because that kind of says, perhaps in 10.4 million other Urs, Ellen dies in that bus crash.
Yeah,
like that's just what happens. She dies in that bus crash, and then in this one where he literally like takes time in his hands and changes things, she survives. And so there's hope for him to, with her. Yeah, I like this read a lot.
I kind of like the book a lot more now with this interpretation, actually.
But that's like, that's just like, I love this interpretation, but it's below subtextual. Like it's
autobiographical.
We're rewriting the end of the story to suit our preferred read on it. Yeah. So moving on, and this is like from here on out, I think the book is just going to get kind of worse because they leave the books behind and they try to explore the other functions. But since local is under construction, they go to the news archive where they surprisingly get to check out news from all the other realities. Cool. We learn that in other Hillary wins the 2008 election, or Romney wins, or a bunch of other people win. Sometimes Obama wins too. But I like this line right here. He always says no to the vice presidency when someone else wins the top spot, Don said. Who always says no? Robbie asked. Obama? Yeah, he always gets asked, and he always says no. It's in character, Wesley says, and while the events change, character never seems to. I love this because it relates back to, the idea of Wesley is never an author. It relates back to Hemingway always publishes A Farewell to Arms. Like just this core idea that, infinite realities, right? Infinite realities, but there is a core to who you are, that details change, events change, but there's some part of you that remains consistent throughout all of them.
Yeah, I love that. It's related to, again, like you said, that and Wesley not being published. There's something deeper than what events can do to you. Yeah.
And I wish it was a story about that. It would be so cool if it's a story that explored that general concept, but it's not. It's not. I also love this little bit where they're talking about the Red Sox. Robbie wants to check on the Red Sox. Wesley felt it was a waste of time, but Don came down on the kid's side, so Wesley agreed. The two of them checked the sports pages for October in 10 different plugging in dates from 1918 to 2009. This is depressing, Robbie said after the 10th try. Don Allman agreed. Why? Wesley asked. They win the series lots of times. Which means there's no curse, Don said, which is sort of boring. Stephen King, by the way, is a Red Sox fan. So I love this idea that like the curse is so defining to be a Red Sox fan, for almost 100 years. It was like the defining aspect of being a fan of the Red Sox. And so you kind of take on that identity that of the team that was cursed that finally beat the curse. If there's no curse, there's just none of that.
Nothing to beat. Yeah. It's depressing. It's boring.
I will say Wesley's response to this is what curse, which I don't know. You're not a huge baseball fan, Matt. You know about the curse, right?
I know about the curse. I'm not a huge baseball fan. Those two things are true. Yes.
I don't understand how any human being living in this country could not know about the Red Sox curse. I like, it's so funny because he's dating a basketball coach. Yeah. She's probably pretty into sports, and he seems completely indifferent to sports.
I think it emphasizes that this guy is like quite a myopic nerd type of guy. He's not well-rounded, actually.
Definitely not. Yeah. The most impactful experiment of the night, of course, is when they try to search the that is Robbie's birthday and find that in this particular world, the world ended after the Cuban Missile Crisis and ceased to exist after, I think it was, I don't remember, 1962 sometime. I don't remember exactly when. And so they're just really bummed out and sad about it. So they decide maybe that's enough looking into the news in other worlds.
Yeah, I mean, so this whole interval where they look at the news, like that's all fun and all, but like strictly for me, it's less fun than the previous chapter where they looked at all the books.
Yeah.
And I just find myself thinking like, I just wish there was like more of that and we could have skipped over the whole like, oh, Romney won in one world.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
This is the basic problem with the story, right? Is that in a story you technically should be building, right? You do the first one, you build the second one, and then the third one is the climactic one of these three that is like, oh, holy shit. And I think he's trying to do that, but you're right that each one of the functions is less interesting than the one before it.
Yeah. And so different as to be like, this doesn't feel like any kind of narrative continuation. It just feels like three different things.
I also have a question to you and to our listeners. Have you ever read the news on your e-reader?
Well, no. I don't even read the news. So this literally strikes me as the thing where like he agreed to do the story. He said he had an idea, and Amazon like sent him a pamphlet that has all the functions of the Kindle on it. And like maybe the early Kindle, they had this idea. It was like, oh yeah, and you could read the news on it too. But no one would do that because who would do that? And so he worked that in because he's like, oh yeah, local news. Yeah,
there we go.
I think there, you're triggering my memory that I think there was a big thing where all the newspapers were like, oh, we're gonna sell you a subscription to your e-reader, and it's going to be like it's going to look nice. It's going to be formatted for your e-reader. Like, I think this was a thing. Like there was a whole period of time where there was this concept they were trying to make happen of like e-magazines.
Yeah.
Where it would be like, it would look really nice. It would be nicely formatted. It would look like a beautiful magazine. It didn't succeed because like the web is the content that is made for screens.
Yes, yes. And cell phones like surpass the e-reader as your ability to go to that. Isn't that weird that this story does not have cell phones in it, really? I mean, they're there, but they're not like when Wesley is like frantically trying to call Ellen and warn her that her bus is going to crash and she's going to die, and she just like won't let him talk. In the back of my head, I was like, you just like text her.
Yeah, send her a text.
Send her a text and be like, hey,
it's entirely possible that he doesn't know about text messages.
That is very true. He probably doesn't have a smartphone. He probably has one of the old flip phones that texting is such a pain in the ass.
I think you're right. But I mean, based on his age, so I remembered this because he said he was born in like the mid 70s, and then it says he's 35. Yeah. Which made me instantly turn to dust.
Yeah.
Because
we're older. Yeah.
Because he thinks of himself as old and we're older. So this must have happened in like 2010 or so, meaning there would be fucking cell phones all over the place. So,
yeah, I mean, it's like, I think it just takes place in 2009, which is the year it was written.
That makes sense.
So yeah, it is kind of wild that cell phones just don't appear in it at all. It's probably like Amazon's like, and don't write about smartphones because we're really fucking worried about these smartphones. They're going to take all our shit.
Yeah. Don't mention that a better version of this thing that we're selling also exists already. Yeah.
And it also calls people.
Yeah.
Oh man. So this is the part where we get what you and I were talking about earlier, where Robbie tells him, you could type up one of these books and send it into a publisher. Ever think of that? Submit it under your own name, become the next big thing. And typical Wesley here, it was an attractive idea, especially when Wesley thought of the useless scribbles in his briefcase. But he shook his head. It'd probably violate the paradox laws, whatever they are. More importantly, it would eat me from like acid from the inside out. He hesitated, not wanting to sound prissy, but wanting to articulate what felt like the real reason for not doing such a thing. I would feel ashamed. Which I think it's important to say that Wesley is not a bad guy, right? Like to channel Eyes of the Dragon here. He's a good boy. He's a good boy at the end of the day, right? But again, like we talked about, I wish he was a bad guy. I wish he would have allowed himself to be a bad guy for long enough to actually try to pull this off.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you take a character, you put them in a really bad situation where they act against even what they might normally do, and then they regret it, and there's consequences. And that's what we all wish would have happened. Seems like the natural premise for this book. He could even you could even do it and then be like, well, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to donate 90% of the money that I earned via ripping off alternate dimension Hemingway's books to charity. And then you could tell yourself a story even where you're like, yeah, and then I get to bring the wonder of this novel or these novels to all the people of this world that would otherwise never get to experience it. So I'm doing something good. And then you could actually kind of have the debate of like, is he just telling himself that, or is that a valid reason? Or like, all of this is interesting.
It's so interesting. It's so interesting. Like we've already talked about the movie Yesterday, which does a lot of the things you're talking about here. Not a perfect movie. I enjoyed it a lot because I love the Beatles, and
I just think it's a really fun movie. Yeah.
It explores all these stuff in fun ways, and it also, like, my favorite thing about that movie is it kind of, through this weird setup, explores the idea of imposter syndrome, like by turning the feeling of imposter syndrome into a literal thing and exploring that idea. And that's a great way to do this too, because anyone who's a creative in their lives has experienced imposter syndrome, even when you're not stealing your entire thing whole cloth from someone else, right? Even when you're not literally being an imposter. It's a fascinating idea. There's so much you could do with it. There's this feels to me like a Wesley who's already at the end of what is the most interesting arc for him, the arc to realize that the shame would eat himself alive. Like, to start out with that, like, this is what we meant at the beginning by saying, like, I feel like he felt himself being pulled in this direction and, like, knew he had another book that he was working on, knew that this was supposed to be like a 2-month thing tops, that I was going to pump out 50 pages, throw it on a Kindle, and listen to all my peers make fun of me for it. And he's just like, okay, I have to turn away from that. I have to look away from that story. That's the better story, but I just don't have time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's almost like a joke in that it takes you up to this line and the character's like, nah. You're like,
yeah. What? And then we just move on.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's crazy. All right, moving on to chapter 5, Local, under construction. This is the final function of the Kindle we have to talk about, and in this chapter we really get into it. So while sitting at breakfast the next morning thinking he was done with all this stuff, Wesley finds that he has somehow opened Twitter on his cell phone again and is looking through the Kindle, and he sees that Local is no longer under construction, and he learns that this allows him to see local news reports from the future. So he decides, like, I think at the very same moment the bus rolls past the diner that's heading to the basketball tournament that his girlfriend's going to. So he wants to see, he genuinely wants to do a good thing here, which is, I want to see if they win the tournament, and then I know how to approach her when she reaches out to me on Monday, because she has that. We didn't talk about the message she left that basically said was like, don't talk to me, I'll come back on Monday and then we can talk and get together again. So he wants to figure out how what mood she's going to be in. This is an altruistic reason for doing this whole thing. And finds out that she and almost all of the basketball team will die in a bus crash on their way back Sunday evening. And I think there's a writing technique that King does here that I want to take a second to explore with you, Matt, because King basically has Wesley read the headline, spill his coffee in shock, and then we cut to moments later where Wesley is discussing the headline with Robbie, and they're both freaking out about it, but we still haven't actually seen what the headline is. Like, he takes the information and holds and holds and holds and holds as their freak out escalates before finally delivering the headline of the news. And I think it's really effective. Like, I don't like the direction the story is going, but this particular moment of tension management really, really worked on me.
Yeah, this is one of the times that I actually like withholding information, because it's not for very long.
No,
it's really, and it helps convey the impact of what he has seen.
Yeah, definitely.
So I don't mind it at all. In fact, I like it.
But unfortunately, this is where the story like kind of completely loses me, because what we do from this point forward is shift into a fairly boilerplate time travel prevent disaster story, right? Like there are thousands of these, and this is just another one. And it's not like those are bad stories, right? I think that's a good story type, but there's just so much more interesting stuff going on here. So much more to say or do with the fact that you have this Kindle. And we're just going to move on. The rest of the story is just preventing a drunk driving accident.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
right. It would be like in the movie Frequency, if he also had a Kindle that allowed you to see books from other dimensions.
You're absolutely right. Like the story has been done and done and done, that they get like someone gets something that allows them a hint at the future and the ability to change the future in some way.
Yeah.
And so they do it. And
there's better ways of, like you said, that not only has that story been done, but that story is always better executed when you actually focus on that as the specific thing instead of having three other things happening.
Yeah, and they're like, not only has that story been done, but that story's been done by Stephen King because he wrote a whole book about it. I mean, technically, when he wrote this story in 2009, 11/22/63 had not been written yet. But it is a story that he was tossing around in his head for like decades. So, okay. I don't know. I just don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think we've beaten this idea at this point. We're just going to follow out the rest of what this story actually was.
Yeah. So Wesley tries to call Ellen to warn her, but she needs her space and doesn't let him get a word in. So it's all her fault, technically, right?
Yep, it's all her fault.
I do like that the story takes the time to say, but like, even if he did warn her, like, no one's going to believe that, right? Like, just imagine getting a phone call from someone that says, all right, your bus is going to crash. I've read it on my pink Kindle. Trust me on this. You can't go to your job tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's the most important day of your job. You can't go because my Kindle says you're going to crash.
Yeah. I don't know.
Would you believe it? Would you believe it?
I think this is kind of like that discussion we had about would you believe it if your friend told you that there was a vampire in his house?
No, that's true.
Where it's like, not really, but I would know that something was really wrong if they seemed serious.
Enough so that you would change your weekend plans?
I don't know. If, the relationship, the sort of weirdness they have here where they've broken up, maybe she would think, okay, he's cracked. He's trying to trick me. He's trying to manipulate me, and I'm just gonna ignore him completely. And that wouldn't be entirely irrational.
To be fair, like the only thing you would really have to do is just could the bus leave 10 minutes earlier or later than it was going to? Could you just like stop and get chicken nuggies on the way home?
Right. Yeah. Just remind her how much she likes those chicken nuggies. And that should be enough. I mean, I think they talk about the idea that all they need to do is delay them. And then I forget who it is exactly. One of them is like, we should make sure though, we should like make it absolutely unavoidable that, so they slash the tires and so, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. All right. So you're absolutely right that they basically decide the only way to be absolutely sure is to track down the woman responsible for the accident, who is a woman named Candy Reimer. So we move into chapter 6 titled Candy Reimer. Wesley and Robbie having left poor Don on a weekend getaway with his family because I guess King decided he didn't know what he was as a character, and so we just need to remove him from the story as quickly as possible. So he's gone now. So they left him behind, and Candy and the other two are stalking Candy Reimer the night that she's on her binge to get wasted and unknowingly crash a bus. They're ready to walk up and prevent her from doing it any time. And in this moment, we see King kind of chase the squirrel a little bit here, which, by the way, I know we said we do a poll, but I'm really falling in love with that particular version of the term.
I can tell. Yeah. So that's our term for taking a deep dive on a tertiary character that we're not even really going to return to.
Yep.
Yeah.
And here is Candace Candy Reimer, age 41, divorced, 3 children, now in the custody of their father. During the last dozen years of her life, she'd been in and out of 4 spin dry facilities, roughly one every 3 years. According to an acquaintance, she seemed to have no friends. She had tried AA and decided it wasn't for her. Too much holy rolling. She had been arrested for a DUI half a dozen times. She had lost her license after each of the last 2, but in both cases it had been restored, the second time by special petition. She needed her license to get to her job at the fertilizer factory in Bainbridge, she told Judge Wallenby. What she didn't tell him was that she had lost the job 6 months previous, and nobody checked. Candy Reimer was a booze bomb waiting to go off, and the explosion was now very close. So this is a sad, sad woman, Matt. It's sad.
Yeah, she sucks, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, my first interpretation was like, this is the least sympathetic portrayal of an alcoholic that I've seen from King, because mostly it's just sort of matter of fact, like she's dangerous, she's unlikable, she's a mess. Yeah. I think after they kind of run into her, we see like, well, she's also obviously incredibly sad and depressed.
Yeah. I mean, the thing, her response to being just manhandled by this guy is just like, why does everyone treat me this way? You know, It's just like, this woman has obviously had a rough life and she's very unwell. And I'm not saying I forgive her for murdering a bus full of people. Obviously not. Like, she's terrible. Like, she manipulates the system in the worst ways, and the result is that people get hurt and die. That's awful. But yeah, I mean, Wesley feels sorry for her a little bit here, and I do too. It's a sad story. Like, you wish that someone was there to help her. And like, the thing about AA, I think that like the too much holy rolling thing could come off as a little cheeky. Mm-hmm. But the thing about AA is it is very like, not specifically religious, but it is very spiritual. Like, they do like a lot of AA is like giving yourself over to a higher power, and that doesn't work for everyone, right? Like, it's a method that works very well for a lot of people. It doesn't work for everyone, and she's got no other support system. Like, the spin dry facilities are not working for her. She has no friends. The best she has is acquaintance. No one's helping her.
Yeah. Well, and certainly what happens in this story cannot be construed as help of any kind. Like, it's not that it's not like they, corner her and try to kind of have an intervention. They're just totally, pragmatic about it and slash her tires, which is obviously not going to like make her decide to change her ways and then beat the shit out of her, which we're about to get to. Yeah.
I mean, that's absolutely what happens, because Wesley, starts off feeling sorry for her and then gets so angry with her when he sees her walking out of the bar wasted, drunk as a skunk. Importantly, they've already slashed her tires at this point. So effectively they prevented the tragedy from happening. They've already saved this particular tower, to compare Wesley to Roland here a bit, but he saved the tower already, but he has to confront it still anyway. Mm-hmm. And he does in the most violent way. Like, he slaps her 3 times. He screams at her. Like, he calls her a useless bitch. Again, here's, I never talk this way to women, Wesley, here, calling her a useless bitch. Like, he's so like, but here's the thing. Where does this anger come from? Like, where is this coming from? I don't, that's the thing I don't understand about this. Like, there's nothing in Wesley's character. Like, I understand being angry because you almost lost the woman you love, being hurt and angry. But like, this is such an escalation of anger in this character that we really haven't seen except for that one moment with the book. And I'm just like, what is going on with this character?
I mean, I don't discount the moment with the book though, because to me, and this is very much, subtext / maybe making things up. You take somebody who really thinks of themselves as a failure and a mediocrity. I would see that as a person with a lot of inner anger that they're not managing well. Maybe they're not even aware that they have it, but he seems to kind of have a bit of a hair trigger temper.
Yeah.
She threw his book and he said this, terribly cruel thing to her. And here we see him, just basically build up this level of rage and then assault this woman. I don't know. It's interesting. there's a chance that we're just supposed to take this as like he's righteously angry because he almost lost the woman who he loves, and he's sort of understandably angry. But as you point out, it's so like over the he just like he like beats her up. Like it's not like even a single like slap. You could see a character, he's slapping her one time and then being taken aback by what he had done in the heat of the moment. But no, he just like keeps hitting her.
No, I don't think there's none of this that reads to me as like righteousness. Like, listen to this. He slapped her a third time, the sound as loud as a pistol shot. She staggered back against the side of the building, weeping and holding her hands up to protect her face. Blood trickled down her chin. Their shadows turned into elongated gantries by the neon rooster winked off and on. This is not like righteousness. This is horror. Like the comparison to the pistol shot, her holding her hands up and weeping and sliding down, like this is awful. It's awful. And and to your point earlier, like we've talked about how this woman is a drunk bomb waiting to go off, a booze bomb. They didn't defuse the bomb.
Mm-hmm.
They just moved it away from the bus. Like this woman could go on tomorrow and run into another bus full of people, but it's cool. It's not our bus, so we don't care anymore.
Right.
Like they left this bomb armed and said, no, not our problem.
Yeah.
We prevented it from killing the people we cared about, and arguably perhaps made it worse because like here's this woman has another example of why the world treats her terribly. What is the point of getting help if this is the way the world's going to treat me?
Yeah. And it's really interesting because not only is this specific booze bomb still in play, but then Wesley goes on to have this little soliloquy about the nature of evil, which let's talk about that, because that even plays into the idea that like what have they really accomplished here? Have they really accomplished anything?
So, Wesley says, you can get to the person, but you can't get to the evil, Wesley says. His voice seemed to be coming from somewhere else. The evil always survives. It flies off like a big-ass bird and lands on someone else. That's the hell of it, wouldn't you say? The total hell of it. Yeah, I'm sure. Very philosophical, but come on. They got to get a really good look at you before they get a really good look at you in the license plate of your car. Robbie was leading him back to the Malibu. Wesley went as docilely as a child. He was trembling. The evil always survives, Robbie. In all the Urs. Remember that. I mean, again, where is this coming from?
I don't know.
Like what in this experience has him realize? Like, I guess you could argue the thread here is like we have this common thread of there is a core to certain people, right? That like there is a core to Hemingway that is a farewell to arms. There is a core to Obama that like he will never be the vice president to someone. That's just at his core who he is. He's not going to do that. There's a core to Wesley that he will never be an author. And I guess you could argue that Wesley is saying here in this moment after he beats the shit out of this person, there's a core to this woman that is always going to be this drunken mess that is going to get someone killed. And there's no way of actually stopping that. But like, he didn't try.
Yeah, he didn't try in a way that was gonna be effective.
Yeah.
So again, I don't know where Wesley's getting this from. What it reminds me of metatextually is like Atropos.
Sure.
Atropos being the character from Insomnia. For those of you who may have skipped that, the character who would get super mad if somebody stole his kills out from under him by doing time travel.
Mm-hmm.
But then like he's gonna get back at you. I'm gonna get those kills though. I mean, maybe not them specifically, but I'm gonna kill somebody, a life for a life. That's the kind of Atropos idea, and the kind of idea of like balance between the forces that exist in the greater Dark Tower cosmos. So that's what I think this is gesturing toward. I just don't know why Wesley says that here. Like, what is he referring to?
Yeah, I mean, and I love his voice seemed to be coming from somewhere else. It's like in this moment where he fucked with the time, like something was channeled through him temporarily, just like when Jake falls, he says, "Go then, there are other worlds than these," right? Like that both was and wasn't coming from Jake, and you get the idea that perhaps this is both is and isn't coming from Wesley.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
And I agree with you. Like, I think this does serve as a larger, examination on King's whole idea on evil. I think this slots very, very nicely into what all the other books we've read have said about evil, that this idea that like evil is eternal, you can stop it, you can get it off, you can prevent it, but evil itself is not going away.
You have to fight it, but that doesn't mean you can beat it.
Yeah. But you're right that like why is what does that have to do with this particular story? Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. Doesn't it seem like it'll be really satisfying to slash a car's tires?
Yeah, I've always kind of wanted to do that.
Yeah.
I'm never going to, but yeah.
I've always wanted an excuse, like some really bad person. I need to stop them, and I want to just like feel. It just seems like it would feel so satisfying to like drag a knife through that rubber, you know.
I wonder if they have something like that, like they have those rooms where you just get to like go in and break shit because it's therapeutic or something.
Well, we should start that if it doesn't exist.
I've actually read that like the science on like breaking shit as therapy is actually not like venting anger through destroying shit is actually not good for you.
Yeah,
which is not surprising.
From what I've heard, venting in general just trains you to enjoy venting. It doesn't relieve. There's not like pressure because you're not a tank of gas.
Sure.
You're just yelling, and that's not whatever.
Yeah. All right, so we move on to chapter 7, titled The Paradox Police, and now it is time to get fully into our Dark Tower adjacent finale, Matt. Wesley gets back to his apartment and sees a car waiting out front. A Cadillac, a too bright red Cadillac with tinted windows and, quote, gangsta hubcaps. And when he touches it, it feels alive. Now, I know you read this originally before we read Low Man, which is a real shame because if you had read it in order, you would have gotten that oh shit moment that we all did when we read this particular story when we're like, it's the Low Men, it's them.
Yeah, I mean, I still knew that it was like bad guys.
Sure.
I didn't know it was the specific. I mean, you're exactly right. This is the specific literal low men in yellow coats.
Yes.
Which are again, these are described as being the same as the low men in yellow coats. They're not really described as being exactly the same as the Cantoi as we see them in the Dark Tower, although they're quite similar. So that this is the discussion we had before where we're like, are they the same thing or not? I really can't tell.
Well, I mean, I think this book is written after the finale of the Dark Tower, right? Mm-hmm. So I think King gestures towards what is under the skin of the Low Men a little bit more directly than he did in Hearts in Atlantis, for sure. But yeah, they do seem closer to the Low Men in yellow coats variety than it does the ones we see in the Dark Tower itself.
Yeah.
But this is confusing, Matt. So we have to try to. So the Paradox Police are Low Men in yellow coats. So they're here because Wesley broke the Paradox laws. And that, as they say here, you have no idea what you did, the man in the yellow coat said in a meditative voice. The tower trembles, the worlds shudder in their courses, the rose feels a chill as of winter. So by doing what he did, Wesley threatened the tower, right? Threatened the beams, threatened to break down everything in existence by attempting to change things. But don't the Low Men work for the Crimson King, who is trying to do that exact same thing?
I don't,
isn't that like exactly what they want?
I don't know. I was kind of checked out in terms of expecting things to make sense and was just kind of accepting this as a piece of atmospheric horror where you have these creatures here and then they let him go, which they probably wouldn't, honestly, if they're anything like any of the creatures that we've met in this entire saga. It all just seemed like he kind of wanted to end it and he wanted to throw in some Low Men for fun. I don't know, man.
Yeah, maybe that's an uncharitable read, but you're probably right.
It's definitely an uncharitable read. I just don't feel like this is a tight ending at all. As much as I probably like the story more than you, but the ending is just like, man, that ends at the end.
See, so I was ready to come up with a really complex solution for this, which is that this technically takes place after Roland saves the tower and erases the Crimson King, and therefore the Low Men are just out of a job and are looking for a new job, and so they sign up to be part of the Paradox Police Department. But a couple problems with that.
Uh-huh.
They're still wearing Crimson King pins on their jackets. And also the way time works in the Dark Tower is that it's kind of like Roland's quest is eternal and looping. And so like actually when in the timey-wimey stream is the tower, quote unquote, it's just, it's too broad and nebulous to actually fit into any kind of distinct thing. I mean, you really just have to kind of go with it and go, okay, so this is what we're doing. Okay, sure.
Can you imagine, being the low man who has to make the call to like the enamel pin Etsy shop to be like, we want like 50 pens, red eye staring. Anyway, I kind of want to read that story.
And they better not have those shitty backs that fall off. I want the good quality pin backs.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be embarrassing if you lost your Crimson King pin?
Oh my God.
While you run
so
the job?
Embarrassing. Yeah. So Wesley says he didn't think about the consequences to his actions, and the Lowman, who again is a bad guy in the Dark Tower universe, says, of course you didn't. We know you didn't. We're here because you didn't. It didn't cross your mind that one of the people on the bus could become a serial killer, someone who might kill dozens, including a child who would otherwise grow up to cure cancer or Alzheimer's disease. It didn't occur to you that one of these young women might give birth to the next Hitler or Stalin, a human monster who could go on to kill millions of your fellow humans on this level of the tower. It didn't occur to you that you were meddling in events far beyond your ability to understand. These good, high quality, high morality low men just trying to, keep existence together and moving forward, not messing with things. You got to respect them. It's
not until this exact moment that I like realized how sort of empty this is, though. Like because if you think about it, every time you do anything to protect anyone from anything, setting time travel aside, it's like, hey, how do you know that saving that person didn't lead to the birth of the next Hitler? And all you can say is like, shut up. Like I have to do what the opportunities to do good that appear in front of me, and kind of hope that goodness propagates out into the world. And I mean, I guess it's possible that happened, but like that's just a justification for never doing anything.
Yeah.
Because you might create the next Stalin or Hitler, and you don't actually have that option because you have to live. So just do good things. Like it's actually vacuous. And I don't know why I didn't see that before. I guess I wasn't staring at it the way I am now.
Yeah, and I just want to also point out the absurdity of a low man chastising someone for possibly creating Hitler. Like a fucking Cantoy. Like it's so wild. It's so wild.
I don't like, is he just kind of trolling? I don't really know how to interpret this, because these, as far as I understand, these are creatures that like thrive on suffering and misery and chaos. And so like the idea that it's him saying this is totally baffling to me, and I don't know what to do with it.
I don't know, man. The only thing I can get here is that they're just bullshitting him. And actually they're not the Paradox Police. He just assumed they were, and they're there to steal the Kindle because they're like, fuck, this is going to be really good in bringing the tower down.
Oh my God. That's so great. Yeah. That's such a good interpretation. They're just here to steal it.
I mean, they don't ever actually say it. Like, they don't show him any Paradox Police badges or anything. He just kind of assumes.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's so fun. Yeah, that's my new headcanon. Absolutely.
So there's also this part. Is there some sort of power controlling all this? There is, isn't there? When I accessed books for the first time, I saw a tower. All things serve the tower, the man thing in the yellow duster said, and touched the hideous button on its coat with a kind of reverence. Then how do you know I'm not serving it too? This is like, when it comes to the Dark Tower, this is the perfect counter to everything, right? Yeah. It's just like, well, if all things serve the beam, then me doing this, I'm just serving the beam.
In a way, even trying to destroy the beam is serving the beam, because
there you go.
Yeah. It's right. His skills as an English professor, and by that I mean justifying whatever interpretation is convenient, save his life.
Yeah, I mean, that is what we're led to believe, though, right? Is this particular counter is what causes them to take pity on him a little bit here. And the fact that basically we learn that he didn't do anything malicious here. The reason he has this Kindle was indeed a shipping error. But they're not even exactly sure how or why, and so they're kind of left at the awe of the power of the tower to maybe this was supposed to happen this way.
Yeah, they don't understand what happened. He didn't do anything wrong. They can't punish him, I guess.
So they spare him. They take the Kindle back. They spare him. They leave him, and then they just go. And then the story ends. The end. He wakes up the next morning and he finds his girlfriend. One, they just lived, and one, and there's the front page of the newspaper is all of them celebrating their win, and she's got a sign that says, "I love you, Wesley," which is great. I'm glad you've got a great girl, Wesley. I have no idea why she likes you at all, but I'm glad she does. And that's the end of the story.
Yeah, I mean, maybe she was supposed to die, and she's the serial killer.
Yeah, could be.
Initially King wanted to write a different story, realized it was going to be a longer story, truncated it down to be a story about a guy brushing up against enormous cosmic weirdness and successfully talking his way out of being flayed alive. And then the story ended, and it was weird. This is my least favorite thing we've covered on the show.
I know. And like, look, here's the thing. I don't want to be a show that just shits all over stuff. Like, that's never the show we wanted to do. Like, I think I can count on one hand the number of things on the show we've said, I don't like this, right? Like very, very rarely this happens. And in most of the things, even the little bits that I don't like, it's so minor that I don't care. But yeah, this is just not a good story, and it's not a good story for a lot of reasons. And I think those are really interesting reasons. I think King is selling out in a way. And look, get your money, man. That's one thing I've learned about living in this world. Get as much possible money as you can. If someone's going to pay you money to do something, fucking do it. But he's just obviously not emotionally invested in this thing. It's like, he said no. He's probably sitting on the toilet, and it was just like, oh yeah, like an e-reader that lets you read books from authors. Like maybe he was reading like a news story about George R.R. Martin, and it was literally like, oh, what if you could read his other book? And then that started a kernel of an idea that he really wanted to pick at. And like any other time, the story goes into his bottom drawer, and he leaves it for a decade and maybe pulls it out 10 years later and fiddles with it and turns it into something. But this, he had agreed to something, and so he had to turn it in, and they're going to publish it because he's Stephen King and it's an advertisement. And that's why we get the story. And it's fine. It's like it's 50 pages, right? Like we've talked about the story longer than it takes to read the story.
Yeah.
And so it's harmless. It's fine. It's just, it's not great. And I feel bad because I feel like you have a not great viewpoint on what Stephen King's short fiction is now, and it's just not usually this. It's usually much, much better than this.
Well, I mean, I definitely, my main complaint is not like, oh, this is horrible. It's like, no, because it's not horrible. It just isn't up to the standard that I know is his normal level.
He's capable of so much better than this.
Yeah. And in a lot of basic kind of ways too, where you're just like, I don't think that his heart was in this project.
Yeah, no, I don't think so either. I think he was interested enough in the idea that he agreed to do it, and then as he's writing, he's like, "Oh shit!" Like, I wonder if you get him in a room like off the record, and they're like, "You just kind of realized your idea didn't work as a story, didn't you? But you had to turn something in." He'd probably be like, "Yeah."
That would be my guess.
Yeah, definitely. All right. But he did do an interesting thing here, Matt, where he edited it for release again. So we read the edited version of the story. There were changes from the original version of the story, and I went out and read it twice, even though I didn't really like it, to determine what the changes are. And I'm here to report on them, Matt. So here we go.
Okay.
Not much has changed.
Okay.
So in essence, the story is the same. The main beats of the story remain true from one story to another. There are subtle wording changes and adjustments where he probably just read over it and said like, that didn't really work. There's this really interesting part in the original, Ellen's message to him about like, I saw you with the Kindle and it said I could get another choice or another chance. And so I'm going to reach out to you on Monday when I get back in town. There's a really awkward part on the end of that message where she says like, oh, by the way, if that e-reader I heard about was a Kindle, try to see if they can use the internet, because I heard they could. And you're just like, what? And so in the updated version, King just took that part out and had Wesley just say, I wonder if they can use the internet. And then he looked it up. But it's just so awkward. She's like talking about their future and it's like, oh, by the way, that Kindle can use the internet. Looks at audience.
Yeah.
It's so awkward and weird. So I understand why he changed that.
Yeah. That does not sound like a good idea.
Yeah. The other interesting bit in the original on the Faulkner thing, in the original, Faulkner wasn't on Kindle at all. So in the updated version, it specifically says he found every Faulkner title on, his Earth Kindle. But when he went to the function Kindle, there was no Faulkner. In the original, he couldn't find Faulkner on the function Kindle or the original Kindle. I don't know if that's a commentary on the fact that at the time Faulkner wasn't on Kindle at all. But it changes the meaning of it, right? Like it changes it from Faulkner exists in just this universe to, oh, Kindle just doesn't support Faulkner yet.
Yeah.
They haven't dealt with the rights stuff yet. Like, and I'm so glad he changed it, because I find like it's one of the most fascinating moments of where this little thing is just thrown in and uncommented on, that like, oh, by the way, this is the only universe in which Faulkner exists.
Yeah, that's a much more fun interpretation. I agree.
I think the largest change is they extended the sequence that you said was too long anyway, which is them kind of exploring history in other Urs, because there's a whole extended sequence where they search about the JFK assassination in other Urs, and this goes on for pages and pages and pages of them kind of seeing what happened to JFK. Was he assassinated? And all of them no, he was not. And some of them he goes on to win re-election, and some of them he pulls out of Vietnam. Like there's all these things where they explore JFK and what happened. And it doesn't really go anywhere, and it doesn't really tie into our like core of a person thing. It's just this kind of one-off thing, and he took all that out.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess that he recognizes that the whole part where they're looking at the news stories is a narrative swerve and absolutely bleeding away all of the tension that we were generating by exploring the other stuff we were exploring. And he wanted to reduce that, although not cut it out entirely.
Yeah, and I think also in between when the book was written and when it was edited and re-released, he did write a whole 800-page novel about the Kennedy assassination, and maybe realized people were just tired of him talking about JFK. Yeah. He's like, I did that. I'm done with it. I don't need this in here anymore. So that's really it, man. Everything else kind of plays out the same way. Like I said, there are slight adjustments that I'm not going to get into, like wording changes. Some characters talk a little bit differently, some different references, but for the most part, everything's the same.
Mm-hmm. All right, good to know.
Yeah. So you didn't miss a bunch if you read one version over the other.
All right, Matt, that is going to do it for It was a fun little jaunt to the side. I think I was probably the most negative I've been on the show, and I can say with almost perfect clarity that is the most negative I will be for the rest of the season. Yeah,
we got some good ones coming up.
I would expect that. I think even though neither of us loved the story, I think that we still had some interesting thoughts. I hope.
Yeah.
I
almost feel like it's King's skill as a writer is what makes me not like the story, because that he's so good that he allows you to see like into the window of a different story, and then doesn't put the key in the lock of the door to let you into that story. And that's the most frustrating part about the story. It's not that it's a bad story. It's that you can see the really amazing story that's in there somewhere, and he just doesn't give you access to it.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, because I had the same thought where I was like, I would be a lot less annoyed if I didn't have the promise of this awesome premise that was left unfulfilled. I would just be like, yeah, okay, that was all right.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now I'm frustrated. So.
But hey, it gave us something to talk about.
It did.
All right, Matt. So next week we begin The Talisman. This is our first book in this whole project that has not solely been written by Stephen King. So it promises to be very interesting from an analytical perspective, certainly, right? Because we're not just going to be analyzing King anymore. There's another whole person in this book. Yeah,
we're going to have to sort out whose fingerprints are his and whose are Straub's.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just curious, like, what do you know about this book going into it? You haven't read a page yet, but what do you know about it?
What's funny is I thought it was like a Midworld story, and then somebody said something that maybe you said something the other day that made me think it wasn't. And so now I'm like, oh, I don't even know. I thought it was a story that took place in Midworld, and now I don't know. So literally nothing, I guess, is the answer. Yeah, no.
That's so exciting.
Seriously, like I felt like I knew more about the Eyes of the Dragon, because at least I knew that was like a fantasy story that took place in Midworld, whereas I know really nothing about this. So yeah. And I am excited. I'm always excited whenever we're starting a new thing.
Yeah, that's so great. It's going to be fun. It's going to be good times. For the first week, we are going to be reading the entirety of part 1. Like other Stephen King books, this book is divided into different parts. So we are going to be reading part 1 titled Jack Lights Out. It will be chapters 1 through 5 and the interlude. At the end of each part, there is an interlude as well. So it's a pretty big chunk of the book. We're going to be reading about 80 pages for next week. So we're really going to dive into it head first. And I cannot wait to talk to you about it. It's going to be so much fun.
Awesome. Yeah, me too. I haven't started yet, but I'm probably going to start right after we finish talking.
And I believe the audiobook is voiced by Frank Muller.
Oh, cool.
Your old friend.
My old friend. That's wow, what a treat. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. So remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, or on Twitter at kingslingerspod, or over on the subreddit at r/doofmedia.
So if you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, now is the time to do it, because it's new book time and you don't want to miss a second of it. You can find us everywhere there are podcasts, even Audible. We got an email from someone, Matt, the other day that was like, I was looking forward to reading The Dark Tower and I wanted to listen to the audiobook. So I went on Audible and I searched The Dark Tower, and I did find the audiobooks, but I also found your podcast. So thank you. And I'm like, yes, it's working.
Awesome.
It's working.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Amazon.
Yeah.
For your products. All of them.
All of them. We really should have gotten an Amazon sponsorship on this one. Just throw us a few million, Bezos.
Seriously.
That's not even that much for you.
Just 1%.
Yeah. That's
of your revenue.
That's like not even bothering to pick it up money, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you ever read that experiment of like what is the amount of money that you, like, if you dropped on the floor that like wouldn't even be worth your time to pick up, you know? Like it's like for me it's probably like a cent, like a penny, like and like an equivalent value to like the richest people in the world, that penny is like $40-something thousand or something absurd. It's just like, it's crazy. It's a lot of money.
Yeah. There's some statistic that's like Apple gained like $300 million of value every day since Tim Cook became president.
Jesus Christ.
And when you hear that number, you're like, no, you've got a couple extra zeros on there, Matt. And it's like, no, it's a $1 trillion company. Trillion is a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Do the math.
Trillion is a lot.
It works out to be an unbelievable number.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen those things that like say no one understands how much a billion is, and like that show you visually how much a billion is. And like I've seen them like 50 times and I will never not be like, oh, holy shit, a billion's way more than I thought it was.
Yeah. Your brain has trouble with it for sure.
Yeah. So in conclusion, please give us money.
Yeah. Over on patreon.com/doofmedia, like these wonderful people who are helping us get to a point where we can afford to leave ever greater sums of money on the floor.
Yes.
Like Clay T, Kim, they're all going to laugh at you. M, Mark O, Spencer, and Dwayne K. Welcome. We hope you enjoy all the cool stuff over on the Patreon, such as the Other Levels of the Tower podcast. And Scott and I doing our Doof After Dark discussions and so on.
Oh yeah, we got to do one of those this week.
Okay.
I don't have something from the other people, so we got to have an After Dark.
Okay. Let's do it.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I believe there's going to be a new Other Levels of the Tower next week, I believe it is, right? Yeah. I think that's what our schedule says.
Yeah.
So
I don't have the DVDs yet, but okay.
I got you.
Okay.
Man.
Okay.
I got you.
Okay.
If you cannot afford to donate, that is absolutely okay. Not all of us are Jeff Bezos. You can, of course, help out by sharing this podcast with all your Stephen King loving friends. Thank you to everyone who lets us know when you've shared it. Like I think we got another email from someone that said there's like a Facebook group for like 2022 is the year we're all going to read The Dark Tower, and it's like a group of people reading it, and one of our listeners showed up in there and was like, hey, here's a great thing to follow along with it. So y'all are doing some great work for us, and we really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
And of course, you can always leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. This week's Spotlight review comes from Zuzi Cakes, who gives us 5 stars and says, meta-textual. I have been following the adventures of Scott and Matt since early 2021 when I happened upon their podcast in my Spotify suggestions. Ooh, thank you, Spotify. Curious, I clicked on the evocative image of a door opening to the beach and haven't looked back since. I'm a huge fan of the Dark Tower series, and having found these two, I highly recommend them to any other newbie or veteran fan. In their own way, Scott and Matt's examination of the story is a story unto itself that adds another layer of metatextual badassery to the Dark Tower series. Thank you, Scott and Matt, for the long hours of work and conversation you've put into a book series and author that I adore. Long days and pleasant nights. Well, thank you so much, Zuzi Cakes. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but yeah, that's so nice.
That is a really nice thing to say. And as you know, my character I'm a 19 character. So I am part of the metatextual fabric of the tower. Yeah.
I really do like this idea of the story, our story being a story about the story. That's really interesting. Mm-hmm. Someone should write that. We should write an audio drama about two people doing a Dark Tower analysis podcast that gets sucked into, maybe not this is an intriguing idea.
Sure.
It's very 2022 to have a story about podcasters too.
Yeah.
I'm into this.
Yeah. Let's do it, man.
I'm into this. All right. Well, thank you again, Zuzi Cakes, and thank you everyone who has taken the time to leave those ratings and reviews. I think we are almost above 100 ratings on Spotify, so keep those coming. I love to see that number go up. You all have been too kind. Keep it coming. Thank you. And that is going to do it for us this week. We hope you join us next week as we begin our next book and our third to last book in the series. We're talking about the Talisman. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.